Have a listen. That is an example of someone who got really, really, really good at something. And developing a skill or wisdom in any area requires the help of God. This week on Monday, we celebrated the Holy Protection of the Theotokos. The same day is also the feast day of St. John Koukouzelis. Here's an icon of St. John Koukouzelis from the Great Lavra, where he was a monk. He reposed about the year 1341, and he is generally regarded as the greatest musician in the history of the Orthodox Church. We'll read his life together. The monk John Koukouzelis, a native of what's now Albania, was born in Durrës, Albania. In childhood was left orphaned. Endowed with a very fine voice, he entered the Constantinople court school. At that time, this was the peak of Christian culture, and St. John Koukouzelis would have entered to begin his formal musical education at the age of 18 months old, 2 years old at the latest. And his education was endowed by the emperor in Constantinople. So this was the highest level of musical training available in the world at the time. John, for his talents, found favor with the emperor, John Komnenos, and became a chief court singer. But the enticements of the imperial court bothered the pious youth. See, St. John Koukouzelis preserved his chastity and virginity from childhood and lived, although in the palace, he lived like an ascetic, regularly turning down meals with the royal family, telling them he had already eaten peas and beans. He was an ascetic from a very young age. Not wanting to remain amidst the sumptuousness and luxury, and to evade a marriage prepared for him by the emperor, young John began to seek out ways to quit the capital and hide away in an outlying wilderness. By the will of God, he met up with an Athonite elder, an abbot from the great Lavra, who had come to Constantinople on monastic business. The great Lavra was the same monastery where I lived on Mount Athos, following St. John Koukouzelis. John revealed to the abbot his intent, and with the abbot's blessing, he went off with him to the holy mountain. There he was accepted, tonsured into monasticism, and entrusted to tend a monastic flock. He tended sheep in the wilderness, and I've been in the wilderness where he would tend those sheep. Often they would refuse to eat because they would prefer to sit and listen to their shepherd chanting. Even the sheep fasted while being near St. John. There in the far-off wilderness of the holy mountain, the youth without hindrance could give himself over to solitude and prayer, contemplation of God, and the singing of divine hymns. The angelic beauty of his voice charmed even the animals. Out of modesty and humility, the youthful singer did not reveal to the brethren about his gift. Now, there's another reason he did not share his gift with the brotherhood. It's because he was afraid that the emperor in Constantinople would find him if he chanted in the church. And he was right. The emperor, in fact, did send emissaries to every corner of the empire, including Mount Athos. They went to the monastery seeking the greatest chanter anyone had ever heard of, and he was not chanting in the church. He had gotten in obedience very cleverly, tending sheep in the wilderness. So St. John essentially was a criminal for a time because he knew the emperor would not have given him permission to asceticize because he was the emperor's favorite chanter. So he was very clever, but after the emperor had already sent emissaries to the monastery, only then was St. John discovered in the wilderness by an ascetic who was hiking through the wilderness of Mount Athos and heard over the rise such a beautiful voice that he said, that must be not a man, but an angel. And then he saw, oh my goodness, it's the shepherd. So he tells the abbot of the monastery, do you realize the greatest chanter in the world is tending your flock? And he says, oh, we didn't know. So they give him the obedience of chanting on feast days and Sundays. And he lived in a cave outside the monastery. He was so great an ascetic that for many years he did not sit or lie down ever. He would even sleep standing up in the corner of his cave, where I had the blessing of standing after him. But one time, the moving pastoral song touched a certain wilderness dweller, and he informed the abbot about the wondrous singer. Young John then revealed that formerly he had been a singer at court, and tearfully implored the abbot to let him remain at his former pastoral obedience. Monasteries are famous for shielding their ascetics from all outside influence. That's why the monasteries have walls, physically and spiritually. Fearing that the emperor might have displeasure, who might eventually find his favorite and force him to return from the monastery, the abbot himself journeyed off to Constantinople, where he told the emperor everything about what had become of his former subject, and he besought him not to hinder the youthful monk from the salvific path chosen by him. And the emperor finally gave his blessing, though with tears. So you see, the abbot took on his neck the crime of St. John to leave without the emperor's permission. It's a pretty serious crime. That's a spiritual father. He took this on his neck entirely and went and begged the emperor's permission on behalf of St. John, who gave it out of love. Therefore, St. John Koukouzelis chanted on Sundays and feast days in the great church of the holy and great monastery of the Lavra on Mount Athos. He was the protopsaltis on the right kleros, meaning the first chanter on the right side. For his singing, the monk was granted a great mercy by the Mother of God herself. One time after an akathist, sung before an icon of the Mother of God, she herself appeared in a subtle dream and said to him, "Sing, and do not cease to sing. I for this shalt not forsake thee. With these words she placed into John's hand a golden coin and became invisible. The coin, a physical golden coin, was real. He woke up from the vision and had this coin in his hand, which coin worked miracles when venerated. This coin was then hung beneath the icon, and from that time, the coin and icon there began to occur miracles. That icon is still in the Great Louvre today. If you go there, you can venerate it. It's called the Koukouzelis, or the Panagia Koukouzelis. This icon is remembered twice, on the 1st of October and the 10th Friday after Pascha. So this icon too has its feast day on Monday with the Holy Protection. So St. John's life, St. John Koukouzelis, is a perfect example of one lived under the protection of the Mother of God. He bore the cross of asceticism and of church singing with great humility and deepest reverence, devoting himself entirely to this art, following the Archangel Gabriel. And the other great chanters of our holy tradition, St. John Damascene, whose hymns he super-adorned. St. John was the product of the highest level of Christian culture. And so it was fitting that he adorn the hymns of the church to the highest level, completely faithful to the holy tradition in every way. An experienced singer, to say the least, St. John Koukouzelis toiled much in the discipline of church singing, and he rightfully gained for himself the title of magister, which means judge, and regent, overseer. So in those days, the hierarchy of musicians in the church was very significant, including the ranks of both the monastics and the laity, of all ages. And that was a great and holy edifice of Christian music education and the edification of the people of God in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. So St. John Koukouzelis trained in this tradition from the age of 1.5 years, was the judge, the teacher of teachers within this great system of church singing, which was historic, going back even to the Old Testament. There are manuscripts known with his compositions to this day. One is a book by the will of God encompassing all the order of progression of church services, compiled by a judge master, John Koukouzelis. Also, the progression of divine services, compiled by Judge John Koukouzelis, from the beginning of Great Vespers through to the finish of the Divine Liturgy, and the science of song and singing signs, with all the legitimate hand placement, and with all the arrangements of song, and more otherwise. The hymns of St. John Koukouzelis are so difficult that even on Mount Athos, he's only chanted maybe a couple hours a year, and it takes 2 hours to get through one troparion in his style. So it's a level of vocal technique which is almost forgotten. It is forgotten in our time substantially, according to my Athonite friends. And also, church musicians of St. John's era had to have all of the divine services memorized, to the note, to the word, every single troparion. They had to be able to write out all of the books if the books were ever lost. So all of that knowledge was within him. And you can see he was truly an earthly angel and a heavenly man. And I was very blessed to chant in the same church on Mount Athos where St. John himself chanted. The very same floors. To sit in the trapeza on the very same marble benches where St. John sat. They're from the year 963, and he was there centuries later. So when you see that video at the beginning of this, you see a man who's devoted himself to becoming excellent at something. St. John Koukouzelis devoted himself to the work of angels for his entire life and lived more like an angel than as a man. And he reminds us of how God-pleasing it is to adorn the divine services, to take up the art forms, which are specifically churchly, ecclesial. Saint Seraphim of Sarov says there is no holier obedience than a church obedience, even if you're just sweeping the floor of the temple. St. John's example is high and holy, and he was renowned for his humility, though more gifted than perhaps any other natural man ever has been, of the ability to sing in the church and compose church music. He was also a great hesychast, and in the manuals, which are still on Mount Athos of chanting instruction, there's iconography of the chant form, which includes musical signs, vocal technique, and the mystical meaning of the 8-tone system created by St. John Damascene. So this is knowledge both exoteric and esoteric, spiritual, soulful, and physical. And also there are illustrations of an Athonite master, St. John Koukouzelis, teaching a student. They both have prayer ropes in hand while kneeling, studying the chants of the church and the psalms of the church. So this means that chanting and noetic prayer go hand in hand. And St. Porphyrios tells us chanting is for all Orthodox Christians. Psalmody, chanting the psalms and the hymns of the church. Psaltic music, another English term, which is correct. This is for all Orthodox, not just for the greatest chanter of us all, St. John Koukouzelis. But may God help us to follow the example of the saints and endeavor to join that angelic choir while we're yet in the body, that we might have hope of being united to that heavenly choir, that army of angels in paradise for all eternity, with the Lord and his mother. Amen. St. John Koukouzelis, pray to God for us.